In the year 1431, in a crowded marketplace of Rouen, the English army burned a 19-year-old girl alive. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc. But if you look closely at the trial records, you realize something strange. They didn't just execute her for winning battles or violating political boundaries. They spent months of staging an elaborate theological trial to prove she was a witch, a literal agent of Satan. Why went to such length for a prisoner of war? In the medieval mind, reality was governed by an absolute unyielding law. There was no room for nuance, no political grey area, and no middle ground. If John was a holy saint sent by a god, then the English were, by definition, fighting against God himself. To maintain their legitimacy as the soldiers of light, they had an absolute psychological necessity to turn her into absolute evil. This brutal obsession with splitting the world into pure light and pure darkness. This rigid us versus them mentality is often dismissed by a basic flaw of a human nature. We tell ourselves that the human brain is simply hardwired to think this way, but history reveals a much more profound truth. It isn't natural. It was an engineered ideological weapon invented by 2,500 years ago in the ancient deserts of Persia by a prophet named Zoroaster. Today, this faith has dwindled into a dying ember, kept alive by fewer than 200,000 followers across the globe. To the modern public, it is almost entirely invisible, perhaps remembered only through its most famous modern son, Freddie Mercury, the legendary frontman of the band Queen. His family proudly practices in this ancient faith, but long before Freddie Mercury commanded stadiums, his ancestral religion pulled off the ultimate intellectual heist in human history. It secretly infected ancient Judaism, weaponized the Roman Catholic Church, and laid down the exact black and white worldview that we still use to tear our societies apart today. To understand the weight of this legacy, we have to look at what Zoroastrianism actually taught. It was founded in ancient Iran by the prophet Zoroaster, known to the classical world as Zarathustra. Before his arrival, the ancient Mediterranean and Near East operated on a completely different spiritual frequency. The Greeks, the Egyptians, and even the early Israelites viewed their deities as complex, volatile, and deeply unpredictable beings. They were gods of the spectrum. The same deity who brought the rain to feed the crops would just as easily send the fog or food to destroy an entire city. Good and bad mixed together in the divine. Zoroaster swept away that entire chaotic spectrum. He took the universe and divided down the middle into an absolute metaphysical grid. At the absolute top stood Afro Mazda, the wise lord, a supreme deity of absolute light, order, and truth. He was entirely good and incapable of causing harm, but existing independently and opposing him was Ahriman, the spirit of absolute darkness, chaos, and deception. This core dogma introduced a universe governed by two opposing cosmic forces, Asher representing the truth and cosmic order, versus the Druj representing chaos, lies, and illusion. But Zoroaster didn't stop at cosmic geography. He taught that humans were granted complete free will for a singular purpose, to act as active foot soldiers, the troops in the eternal war. Every single choice, every word spoken, and every stray thought either fed the light of Abraham or fueled the dark corruption of Ahriman. While the human mind naturally likes to categorize things for survival, it was Zoroaster who elevated categorization into a supreme and unalterable law of the universe. Even the ancient Greeks were deeply fascinated by this. Philosophers like Plato studied Persian thoughts and captivated by the radical division between the pure spiritual realm of truth and the corrupt material realm of illusion. It offered humanity its very first intoxicatingly neat explanation for why bad things happen to good people. But how did an ancient Persian ideology cross the sea and plant itself into the heart of Western Europe? The historical and geographical bridge was a moment of profound trauma, the Babylonian exile. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian Empire crushed Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and dragged the Jewish ruling elites into captivity. As the eminent historian Norman Kahn points out in Cosmos, Chaos, and the World to Come, early Hebraism did not possess a concept of an all-powerful deity. God was responsible for everything, both the light and dark, as explicitly stated in the ancient text of Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all those things. But when the Persian Empire later conquered Babylon and liberated the exiles, Jewish theologians spent decades living under Persian cultural hegemony. There, they collided with Zoroastrian dualism. As preeminent scholar Mary Boyce explains, this foreign concept offered immense psychological comfort to a traumatized, conquered people. With all of them to say, our suffering is not because our God has abandoned us or is weak, but because a separate, cosmic force of absolute evil is waging war against the light. Over the following centuries, late biblical and apocryphal texts fundamentally shifted. The figure of Satan transformed from a loyal heavenly prosecutor under God's command into an independent, malicious cosmic rebel, a direct mirror of the Persian Ahriman. When early Christianity split from Judaism and traveled to Rome, it carried this Persian dualistic DNA inside its core structure. And when the Roman Catholic Church grew into a powerful medieval empire, that abstract theology was transformed into a weapon of historical action. This brings us back to the marketplace of Rouen and the execution of Jeanne d'Arc. Because the Zoroastrianism binary had been completely embedded into the Western religious mind, political nuances was a theological impossibility. The English could not simply say, she is just a talented enemy general. If they accepted her claims that God sent her, they would have to accept that they were the agents of darkness. By using the trial to relabel her visions as demonic, they forced her into the evil column of grid, making her execution a holy necessity to preserve their status as the soldiers of light. This was the exact psychological engine that drove the darkest chapter of European history, from the bloody fields of crusades to the paranoia of witch hunts. Beyond the mechanisms of good and evil, this Persian ghost altered how Western civilization viewed time, destiny, and human progress. Most ancient cultures, including early Hebraism and Far East traditions, viewed history as a cyclic wheel. Time was like a season, it turned, it repeated, and it moved in eternal circles of birth, death, and rebirth. But Zoroaster broke the wheel. He invented linear eschatology. He was the very first prophet to preach that history is a straight line moving forward toward a grand, predetermined final destination called the futurity, the final renovation of the universe. He taught that the Savior would eventually arrive, the dead would undergo a physical resurrection, and every soul would have to walk across the Shenwad Bridge, a gateway over the beast that widens into a highway for righteous, but turns into a razor-thin blade for the wicked, dropping them into fire. The Catholic Church adopted this linear timeline, turning it into a bedrock of Western dogma through the concept of heaven, hell, and final judgment. History was no longer a repeating circle. It became a progress narrative, a march toward a final day where evil is permanently wiped out from existence. This religious framework outlived the Middle Ages to become the direct ancestor of modern secular ideologies. When modern political movements insist that history has a right side and wrong side, or when secular revolution demand the complete destruction of an old system to build a perfect, spotless, and flawless utopia, they are not using the modern secular logic. They are relying on the structural architecture of Christian eschatology, which itself is a carbon copy of an ancient Zoroastrianism.